Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to dtalks or Disruptive Talks on Education. And when I say Disruptive Talks on Education, we know that education is very important for everybody, and that's what makes human beings different from other living things. And having said that, we know that education is still a luxury for a lot of people all over the world. So, how do we get to educate everybody? It has been the dream from Devi Sansthan and Global Dreams to eradicate disruptive education poverty. And today's topic on detox is also education uninterrupted learning should never stop. And we have amongst us a very special guest, Ms Janhvi Maheshwari Kanoria, Director of Innovation for Education for All. Welcome to the show, ma'am. That is Ms. Janhvi Maheshwari Kanoria, Director of Innovation at Education Above All, which is so important. Now, something about the guests. Ms. Janhvi Maheshwari Kanoria currently leads the Innovation Development Directorate at Education Above All, EAA, which is a Qatar based global foundation working towards quality educational access for the world's most marginalized children, working with over 10 million children in about 50 plus geographies globally. Wow. Her passion lies in designing solutions that advance and accelerate relevant and quality learning solutions to the world's most marginalized. She has previous experience in strategy consulting, K 12 schools, research and policy, and higher education. In the Ministry of Education, she launched Teach for Qatar, the 44th branch of the Teach for All global network. She led a pilot national program to elevate numeracy and literacy outcomes in the lowest performing primary government schools. In Qatar Foundation, she designed a blueprint for an innovative future school and managed 9 top US universities beginning new multidisciplinary programming and their impact based reporting. She serves on the board for Mantra for Change on their journey as they expanded their impact from 20,000 to 50 million students. She received a M.Ed from the Harvard Graduate Education School and a BA from the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction and all those words. And I'm very excited to be here today. I thought I could just start with a little bit of a background of the work that we've been doing and to talk a little bit about this topic around why we really believe that education can't stop. Would that be okay?
Yes, absolutely. We are really earning to hear from that from you.
That's very kind. Thank you so much. So this journey and this conversation, I wanted to really start from where COVID-19 started in our lives. So when COVID-19, the pandemic hit us, it was in April 2019 that schools around the world shut down. And every child was out of school. And we just, as educators around the world, were scrambling to find solutions. We were really trying to think about what we can do differently. And suddenly, we didn't have to think about innovative ways to reach the marginalized. We had to think about innovative ways to reach everybody because this was not suddenly a problem of a few, but a problem of everyone. And what we did is we moved to online school. But one of the biggest things that the pandemic revealed to us is that for children who don't fit into the conventional school system, it's really, really hard. And through the course of this pandemic, no one fit into our conventional system. So we had to really think about why it was so hard. Why is it so hard to work with children when it's at a distance, when it's not regular, when they don't have the support at home, when it is in classroom face to face, when it is in small classrooms where teachers are engaged in their learning? So, a big topic that emerged from there for us was this topic around education uninterrupted. How do you make sure that learning doesn't stop? And learning doesn't become confined to school buildings. So it only happens during the hours of school, within classrooms, because of teachers. And how do you make sure that learning is something that is happening dynamically and organically all the time and everywhere? So that we're not then stressed because schools have stopped functioning or because a teacher isn't there. So, how do we also enable learners to be their own champions with learning? So, when the pandemic hit and all of the world went into lockdown, we began thinking at Education Above All and the innovations team, what happens to all of those children that don't have internet? Because we put out educational resources for those who do, and there are lots of e-resources, there are amazing games, there are just amazing applications that were developed in the course of the pandemic. But what happens to those who don't have access? And when I'm talking about those who don't have access, these are the numbers I'm talking about. So almost half of all the global households in developing countries do not have access to technology. And when I mean technology, it means very differing definitions of technology. There's a huge discrepancy in terms of access to internet. Then we talk about access to TVs, radios, and other broadcast materials, smartphones. And this is not to be taken for granted because there are large discrepancies. And just to bring that to light, through the course of the pandemic, so in the last 2 years, as an education community, UNICEF tells us that we have been unable to reach 465 million children. That's really one in every four children that we've been unable to reach completely. We don't know where they are, we don't know what they're learning because we had no ways to reach them. And that just goes to show to you that how our school system works. Because when the children come to school, everything's okay. But once they're not, what does that mean? And what it also got us to think about is in most of these communities that we work in, most of the marginalized communities, a lot of the NGOs and smaller schools will tell us that COVID was just one disruption in a very long line of continuous disruptions that they face. So every year, whether it's a teacher strike or it's an actual armed conflict, whether it's a flood or it's a much bigger climate change related event, whether it's because people have to migrate for work seasonally or whatever reason it is, but there are millions of children every year. 75 million is the number we account for, whose education is disrupted. Now, the question really in our mind was, what do we do for all these children, and how do we make sure that we expand the definition of learning to go beyond schools, and do we help them in their contexts? And their contexts is what you can see on the right side of my screen. They don't have access to learning materials. Sometimes they don't have access to books and stationery and so on. Their parents are not necessarily very educated and they cannot overnight become teachers. They don't, as I mentioned, have internet connectivity or even technology for that matter. There's a huge shortage of qualified teachers in a lot of these places. And there are vulnerable students who may have disabilities or special needs, which of course compounds the problem further. So, when we were thinking of these populations and this problem of learning continuity and lack of interruption, we began to design a solution. And the solution that we came up with is something we're calling the Internet Free Education Resource Bank. Now I should say it stands for IFERB. It's, of course, a mouthful and it's hard to say, but it really is what it stands for. It's a learning approach. And the learning approach is predicated on the fact that students or children can learn from their surroundings. They don't have to learn only based on curriculum. Even the curriculum that exists in the class, we can teach that to them, but they can learn from things around them. And that's the learning approach that we're really focused on. And so it has within it multiple different learning resources, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the main concept is that it mimics real world learning and is inspired from real world learning. But then again, all of the Internet Free Education Resource Bank, as the name suggests, is also internet free. It requires no internet or technology to finish. You don't have to look up anything. You don't have to research anything online, nothing. It's whatever once you download and have the resources with you in terms of the instructions of what to do, you can just go ahead without anything else. The second is that it's low resource requiring. So you don't need any fancy gadgets or scientific tools to do anything that has been asked of you. And you also, by the way, don't require at the same time any sort of books or textbooks. The third is that students lead it themselves. So as much as possible, students take the agency, they experiment, they observe, they run lots of different tests, and then they deduce and come to conclusions. They have parental guidance, of course, and there can be remote teacher support, but we are not 100% reliant on a teacher teaching every part of it. And the next is that it's interdisciplinary. It's really important when we're thinking about learning from the real world and mimicking the real world, that learning become interdisciplinary, that it brings all the subjects together, because that's how it works in the real world. We don't get challenges in the real world saying, here's a math challenge, but it's only math. Huh? There's nothing else in it. There's no other subjects. So that was a really important aspect. And finally, that you can also teach the curriculum through it. So it's not about teaching only life skills or teaching only social emotional learning. It's actually how do you incorporate all of that and teach all of that, including the curriculum, through these learning projects. So here are two examples of it. So for example, in the family tree project, students interview their parents, they understand migration, genetics, narratives, just get lots of information from them. And then they work on everything from biology, as I mentioned, with genetics, to art and design, making their own family trees, to literacy, because they interview and write down, narratives about the family, to geography, because they map out migration patterns, and so on. Or a COVID project where they learned about what is COVID, especially in terms of limited information and awareness. They talk about how it happens. They do experiments on how germs spread. And then they design their own house rules once they've understood the disease and they've understood why it happens. And then it makes a lot more sense for them to do. And now we've had students who go well above and beyond what we've asked them to do. So within the COVID project, for example, we had children who designed contactless sanitizers using waste materials. We had in the family tree project the first time that lots of parents and family members spoke to their girls, because previously they only discussed things like very operational and logistical details like groceries and so on. So we had that too. So some of the resources that we put out in the places we worked, it really went above and beyond what we had imagined it could. And then here's the suite of all the kinds of resources. So, of course, we have project based learning, which I was talking to you about right now. We also have activities for those with special needs. And now, this is a very special offering that we have because it really helps those who are marginalized, even within the marginalized sphere. And it helps them with sort of proprioceptive, gross, fine motor learning skills. And each activity is so simple that anybody can pick it up and do it with these children and really help them grow. The next is math games. This is also a really fun activity. We realize that a lot of fear with relation to subjects comes from actually math. It's one, the most feared subject, and it's also the most hated subject. And it's also, unfortunately, a subject in which the most amount of learning loss happens. So we designed very easy to play, really fun math games. Each math game is only 20 minutes. You typically need like some sticks from the garden. You need a few pieces of paper. If you need a dice, we'll teach you how to make one. So it's really easy to play and requires nothing, and they're really fun. And then, of course, we developed other resources which were also for our global audience, including learning packages and a specific response to the Afghan crisis, and then Arabic storybooks, because we felt like that was a big missing need uh, in the literature. And here is what our impact has been over the last 2 years or so. We worked in over 7 countries with 23 plus pilot partners. We've reached almost 500,000 children in urban slums, in refugee camps, in tribal areas, in remote rural contexts. We've had an 80% completion rate of all the programs. Our programs don't cost that much. It's all cost free and open source. It's just the cost that it would take you to print it. And we've had a spectacular student learning and growth of over 16%. You can also download all of our resources on our website and use it, and you can see the link later in the presentation. And we've had almost 40,000 now, I think, downloads of all these resources. And children just love it. And I think that's what's most important. We've had people tell us that it's at their imagination free, that even though they miss school, this was amazing. Our teachers have told us that they couldn't imagine the children could do as much as they did because it really helped them go above and beyond. So I think and it's also just really helping and engage students. So those have been some of the most exciting points of impact for us. And what it really looks like is it has four very important elements come together. The first is conceptual learning. So it's really focusing on skills that go beyond rote memorization. You really think about it, you really apply it, you really work on it, and it's not just. The second is it's also lots of fun. For example, you can see this little picture down here of this child making a play with his hands for a shadow puppet theater play. So in this project, for example, they learn about light and the properties of light, but then they also make their own story up and then show it to their family using puppet theater. It's also very relevant. It's about real life learning. So, for example, you see this picture about what happens in a project that we have about flood management. It's very relevant to the lives of children in Bihar or in Sudan, where there are lots of floods. So, and children do things which are related and useful to their life. So, for example, they design evacuation plans. So, if there is a flood, how would you evacuate? What is higher ground? What is the right process to follow? And just imagine how much they're learning in doing so, in terms of literacy, numeracy, planning, logistics, geography, all of it. And finally, it's also just meant to really deepen familial bonds because, like I mentioned, when schools are closed, learning should not stop. So, they work with their parents, they work with people in the family who may not even be literate, but it doesn't matter because they're still amazing and they still have a lot of implicit knowledge to share. So, for example, in this project, you can see it's a pop-up restaurant concept. So children learn how to make a meal, often from their mothers, and then they plan it. They do inventory management, budget, how much is required in the recipe, the ingredients, all of it, and they learn so much. And we often say, "Oh, the mothers are literate," but so what? They taught their children so much through such a simple exercise. And then the big question you might ask me, and I'm often asked, is how do you reach these students? And if they're all over the world and they're places with no technology, how did you share it with them? How do you share all these resources? So we work through a network of just unbelievable partners who work on the ground, NGOs, schools, organizations, and they used everything, every means possible to reach the children. Some of them put loudspeakers in the community. Some of them had group phone calls. So one person in the community had a phone. All the children would gather around the person every day, and at the same time, the teacher would call with instructions. Some of them put them in newspapers. Some of them painted the village wall every day with instructions. And of course, in places where we had radios or we had phones, we of course used them. And then this is just a look at what some of the resources look like. I mean, you can see the social emotional learning resource up front, which is called Colors of Kindness. It's a great resource for children to recognize their own emotions and know how to deal with them, which is really important for us in times of COVID when there's so much loss and hurt and confusion. Of course, you can see some Arabic resources. You can also see some of the resources we designed for the Afghan program. And so all of these resources are available in multiple languages, I think 12 plus languages now on our website, completely cost free. And we want to just suggest and recommend that you can all go through all of them and find and use them as you would like. And I'll definitely drop a link in the chat because I realize it's not here. So that's what I wanted to share with you, what we've been doing to ensure that learning continues for these 500,000 children who we work with. Thank you.
Wow, wow. It is so, so inspiring. And like the name of the company, it's so your packages are so innovative and universal literacy that is leading up and meeting all over the world. You're trying to cater to all kind of children, which is so, so inspiring. It's really, really congratulations to you on that. Now we
Thank you.
have some set of questions for you. And First is like you were also talking in your presentation, that is, what is project based learning and game based learning and how does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, project based learning is actually not a new innovation. It's something that's existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. We've just never thought of it for low resource contexts. We always think that, oh, for project based learning, you need a teacher who's very, very well trained. You need lots and lots of resources. You need access to the internet. And that's not the case. Project based learning is very simple. The idea is that by actually doing something with your hands and developing a final product, which is a project, you learn multiple different skills. So you have conceptual learning, you have knowledge, you have other types of, social emotional learning, and it all comes together. And it's typically not a small activity. So the other thing with project based learning is that it engages children to persist and continue and push their learning. So I'll give you an example of one of the projects that we worked with. I'll talk about this pop-up restaurant I was mentioning. So with this pop-up restaurant project, the idea is that over the course of the week, at the end of the week, the children have to present a pop-up meal, like a restaurant, to their family
Very
members.
interesting. Yeah.
So now what they do is through the course of the meal, they have to plan for it. So they start with doing a survey to say who likes what, what meal would be appropriate.
Yeah.
Then they think
Yeah.
about what are the ingredients available, what's at home, so on. After writing all of those preferences, mapping that to the ingredients, and then they say, okay, where's a Venn diagram, what is the intersection? Okay, so now here's a meal I'm going to choose to make. So
Okay.
we've learned a ton of numeracy. We've learned a little bit of survey and literacy skills and interviewing skills through this. Now they have to start out the actual process of planning that meal. So what are the ingredients it would take? How much of these ingredients cost? How much of this do I need? How do I write that list down? And so, what is the total cost of my meal? Now, how much am I going to charge for the meal? How much are people willing to pay? What is the percentage increase? So, imagine the amount of numeracy they're learning. But at the same time, imagine the amount of critical thinking when you're writing a recipe down in steps, because you don't necessarily have recipe books to go to. You're learning
True.
critical thinking, right? You're learning step by step by step. How does this work?
True.
Then what? Then what? Then what? But also, you're learning how to cook. That's a nice little,
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
effect of this whole thing. So that's a little bit how project-based learning works. And game-based learning is really the idea being that there are lots of principles which come with games, which we sometimes underestimate. It's different from play-based learning, right? So play-based learning is learning from play, but game-based learning is really about learning about what is competition, what is collaboration, what is working under pressure of time, and what is thinking about multiple factors including a few steps ahead. So when you think about a game, if you're playing any game, you have a strategy in mind. You approach a monopoly board and you say, I am going to buy out everything, or oh, I'm going to buy out the expensive property. So you're thinking a few steps ahead. There's collaboration because you usually have a teammate and then you have someone you're against. So that's competition. So a lot of those principles to bring in is very important because those are principles you use every day in life with team members, with people from other organizations. You're negotiating sometimes. Sometimes you are actually collaborating. So how do we teach those principles was also really important. And so we used and pulled from a lot of this to say we can do this in low resource context, and there should be no reason why this is only something that's done in places which is very high resource.
Yeah, very interesting. And especially like you were also mentioning about the foundation literacy numeracy in your presentation.
Yeah.
And this is also a part where they're actually trying to, if there are 10 people eating, how much ingredients I have to get,
Yeah,
how much I divide, what is the
absolutely.
ratio for one person. And this is the best way to learn, which is so amazing. Awesome.
Yeah.
So the next question here is, how does this work with teachers who are not trained?
Yeah. So this is a big question we get, right, all the time. We're sort of like, will this work? Because there's so much amazing training for project-based learning and game-based learning, and it doesn't end really. And even in some of the best schools in the world, teachers train for years and do this. And we just thought that, look, we don't have that luxury, unfortunately. And we often didn't even have teachers, like I'm saying. So forget the luxury of training them. We didn't even have access to them. So we said,
Yeah.
let's just try and script this as much as possible, give as many instructions and examples as possible, and see how it goes. So a lot of the NGOs we work with or schools we work with, they typically do 12 to 15 resources that they use from our bank. So what happens is the first few resources, they're very worried and they have no idea what to do. because they're sort of like, how can we let the children just decide this by themselves? Where is the example that they copy? Where is the template? Where's a worksheet? Because we're used to thinking like that, right? And we don't know how to give them this openness with project-based learning. The very good news is project-based learning is very instinctive. So the minute they do it 2 or 3 times and they're like, oh, this works, they immediately get it, because this is how we work in the real world, right? Like, for example, my example on pop-up restaurant, every mother does this every single day when she's in the kitchen, and every father does this every single day when he's making a budget or is in the kitchen. So we do this. It's just that we never thought of this as a way to teach and learn. So the question was, how do we adapt that very natural process of learning and evolving into education? And so actually, it was very easy to work with non-trained teachers. It just took us a few weeks because everyone is so used to a particular system, which is very, very prescribed, which is, you cannot deviate at all from the textbook, that we had to almost teach them to unlearn that and say, it's okay, don't worry. There was so much fear that we had to just make sure that they got comfortable with it. And frankly, even the children got comfortable, because even in the beginning, they were so unclear and so uncomfortable. And then we had to say, no, it's okay. Imagine, be creative. We want that. We are actually inviting you to be imaginative and creative. That they were so scared.
Yeah.
They've never been asked to do that before. So it
True.
ended up being really fun for us to see how people got unleashed and were able to do this, their creativity. But in the beginning, I think a couple of projects or a couple of new ways of doing things, it takes a few weeks, which was not,
Yeah.
honestly, not bad.
Yeah. Awesome. So the next question here is that how can we work with communities who are unaware about this?
Yeah. So we had a lot of problems with that, because in the beginning, the thing is, we've almost conditioned our communities to understand what is good education and what is bad education based on a particular set hierarchy. So for them, they would tell us, for example, oh, are you giving us internet free education and technology free because we can't afford technology, because we are second class? And we would keep
Yeah.
saying to them, actually, in the most advanced parts of the world, they're trying to get kids off screens. They don't
Yeah.
want kids to be on screens. It's not true. It's not like technology will solve all your problems. We're not giving you a worse education. We're actually giving you what they are asking for. You have the
Yeah.
luxury that you don't have to force your kids to get off computers and iPads and put screen times. So that was the
Yeah.
first. The second was, they're just not used to seeing their kids having fun and learning and exploring and learning and taking time to come to conclusions. They're very used to give them an answer. Where is the fact? What do they come home and learn? And the thing with project based learning is, it gets messy. So it
Yeah.
takes kids a few days, and that's the idea, right? To come to the conclusion, to think it through, to work through the challenge, to observe something. I mean, I'll tell you an example of an experiment. So for the flood management project, kids had to build a model, and they had to build a model and understand why human behavior is causing additional flooding. So how, when we change the path of water, how when we deforest, it's causing additional flooding. Now, in doing so, it takes the children a little bit of time. They have to build the model, they have to try it a few times. Then they have to say, okay, experiment one was like this, two was like this, three was like this. Here's my observation. Sometimes the observation is interesting because it's not exact. So, for example, they may say the tree, if it's placed here versus there, it will have a different impact. So, deforestation has a different impact. Now, parents are so afraid of this, that what do you mean? Why aren't you just telling my child what is the right answer? And why are they having
Mm.
so much fun? Why are they jumping around and playing math on a number line you drew on the floor? Why are they sitting and writing this?
Yeah.
So that was really hard for us to almost again uncondition the parents to say they are learning. And actually, one of the things we did with the parents is we said, okay, forget it. We're not going to talk to you about 21st century skills and fun based learning and all of that. What we'll do is we'll say, okay, so you want him to learn addition, right? So in the beginning of the project, we'll do a little assessment and we'll tell you, your child knows, up to addition up to number 10. At the end of the project, we'll do the same assessment and you only tell us how much have they learned. So gradually, by actually showing them outcomes, they were like, oh, so they're actually learning a lot. We said, yes, absolutely, they're learning a lot. They're also having fun. But
Yeah.
the main thing thing is what you wanted, which is they're learning a lot, is happening. But we've just told our parents so many times that this is how it should happen, that they have become also used to that and wanting that.
Very nice. Awesome. In somewhere in your presentation, you were also talking about how you had programs or learning packages to ask the students or just teach the students how to deal with emotion. So, what about the socio emotional learning, and how did you manage the emotional distress the children in times of COVID?
Yeah. This was really important for us because, frankly, I think two things happened. One is children were just very bored, and so they needed to be productively engaged, which is what our resources provided an outlet for, to have fun and be productively engaged. But the second was there was a lot of loss. A lot of people lost people close to them. So, I mean, and imagine how a 7 or 8 year old was processing something like COVID happening. Even for us as adults, it was a shock, right? We could never imagine a pandemic. We'd never lived
Yeah,
through this. This is something of science movies.
yeah,
So imagine how they were processing it. So a few things that we did is actually break down some of these things. So we had projects on COVID, we had games on COVID. So they understood COVID a little bit better. They began to appreciate what happened, how it happened. But the second is we also decided to develop resources which are focused on social emotional learning and outlets for that. So I'll give you an example. We have a resource which is called Imagine That. Through the course of this, children essentially we open their powers of creativity and they're supposed to imagine a different world from the world that they live in. So they start with almost saying that if the sun was another color, what would it be? If the water was a different color, what would you make it? If the shape of a house, when we typically draw houses as kids, we draw a square and then a triangle on top. If it
yeah,
wasn't a triangle, what shape would that be? So we're trying to teach them a little bit about colors and shapes, but we're also trying to really say, but what else? Why do you always follow the same set pattern? And then at the end of it, we said, if your world could look different, what would it look like? What are the three
yeah.
things you would change? How? Why? So we also gave them a bit of a space to talk about how they were feeling, express how they were feeling, sometimes through art, sometimes through speech, sometimes through interactions with peers. It could be any way. But so that we had a space for their emotions, and then we had taught them coping mechanisms. So we had another resource, for example, called Be Your Own Superhero. And through that, we taught them a lot of different resources and how they can rely on themselves and how they can be their own superhero. And we taught them to look around them and see what they admire about different people and then what they admire about themselves. And which of those habits from other people they want to take on themselves and cultivate. Because the self belief is just so critical and essential. So for us, that was a really important piece that we very, very deliberately also ensured was sprinkled through our work. So it wasn't necessarily just a standalone work, but also every day or every other day, we had a little routine which was focused on social emotional learning, just breathing routines, routines to connect to nature, so on and so forth. So that regularly we were recognizing that our children are human. They're bound to have emotions through this, and we need to give them space for that.
True. Excellent. This is such a lovely way of asking or telling people how they can face their own emotions.
Yeah.
How did you work in places with no resources?
Yeah, and I must tell you, Anupama, that when we say no resources, we mean no resources. We
Right.
mean like they don't have a ruler, they'd never seen a book before. And for us, I think the most challenging was places which had never seen or had access to anything written. Because how do we make people practice literacy if you don't have any books, or if you don't have a newspaper, a magazine, something which is written? So that was really, really challenging. So, for example, in one of the tribal districts in Chhattisgarh where we worked, there was nothing. There was nothing written, no newspaper, no magazine, no book, no nothing. So we did the best we could. I mean, so one of the ways we did it is we said, okay, make your own. You don't have it, make your own. So one of the parts of the project was make your own ruler, make your own dice, It's a lot of learning actually, and it's a lot of fun for
Yeah.
them. And these kids are very, very evolved when it comes to handicrafts, when it comes to woodwork. So they could do it
Mhm.
very easily. There was no problem. And then for the books part, we said write your own books. So you don't have access to books now. What can we do? Now let's make our own, and then let's exchange and work with that. So, for
Mhm.
example, one of our projects involves grandmothers telling their story, they're telling their grandchildren folk stories, any folk story from their community or tribal story, traditional story. And then the kids have to reimagine that, think of a modern twist to it, and rewrite it. And they
Okay.
write it as books. Then they
Mhm.
exchange the books, and then they do a lot of work around summaries, around comprehension, around spelling, because now I have a book. Now I have
Yeah.
access to make you do that. But in the absence of the resources, we just had to make them do their own. That was the only way.
Yeah. So the next question is also somehow you've answered now that it says that if there is no technology, how did you reach the children? So I guess if you want to add something more to this, but
No, I
this
just
is
want to
how.
say that there are ways. I mean, it's not easy, but there are ways. So I think I share this in the presentation also. I mean, in parts of Sudan, we use loudspeakers, which those
Yeah,
megaphones.
you said that, and
Yeah,
painting the street
walls,
villages.
I mean, everything that
Yeah,
it takes, right? And so, and
yeah,
these children are so eager to learn
yeah,
that
yeah,
it's okay. It works, if a child is not eager to learn, then it's very hard to reach them like this because it's not easy, it's not, well structured. But if a child is eager to learn, then they will come and seek that learning. So,
yeah.
however we get it to them, it's okay.
Right, right. So, how did you change the approach when working in different countries, and what did you learn about working in different countries?
Yeah, so we worked in almost, I think, 11 countries directly
Wow.
now.
Mm.
I'm going to say that one thing that is the same is the way like I mentioned, the way that children get involved and get engaged and own their own learning, and the magic that they can create when you just let them be and let them be creative and so on. But I think the differences are very interesting actually in terms of which things and which projects resonate and what the learnings from that can be. I'll give you an example. We had one project which is on making your own ID cards. It's a very simple project. Kids make their own ID cards. Now, when we did this project in a refugee camp, it was a
Yeah,
way for them to hold on to their identity, to their past, to their heritage, their culture, all of that. When we did the same one in Pakistan, it was the first time that anyone had ever asked this girl what she likes. It's the first time anyone had asked her about her identity separate from the village identity. So
yeah,
I think the same resource can have, and the same project can have very different meanings. For example, when we did our pop-up restaurant project in Maharashtra, the mothers
yeah.
told us it's the first time my son has entered a kitchen. And it's
Oh,
taken off the stigma and taboo for him to enter the kitchen. Whereas the
yeah,
same project, when it was done in Lebanon, they left saying, "Oh, we realize importance of not wasting food and how much
yeah,
effort it takes to cook the food." Now, these are very different learnings which have come from the same resource. So, what I want to say is we also have to give space for communities to make that learning, right? If you just say, oh, the learning from this is this literacy, this numeracy outcome, that's it. It doesn't work. But if we actually say, okay, what else can you do? What did you learn? Here are some reflection questions. How do you reflect on this? How do you make it your own? What is relevant in your community? The project only becomes different and the learnings become different. So I feel like what
true.
I've learned about different countries is the needs are different, the contexts are different, and therefore you just have to create resources which have that again, that space, but also the flexibility and adaptability to ensure that it fits everywhere, and you have to create the space for reflection.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Did you notice any difference while working with girls in your projects?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I feel like the
Like one
girls,
example is that girl from Pakistan you were just talking
yeah,
about.
the girls didn't have a voice. So for them, actually, to get a voice was a huge deal, a huge, huge deal. So for them to actually be allowed to think and then to speak up about their opinions, to make their own conclusions was unheard of. So the first time someone asked, one of the panchayat leaders asked a girl in Bihar, what would you do in terms of an evacuation plan? She was like, nobody has ever spoken to me and asked me this question. So she
Yeah.
spent 5 days then designing an evacuation plan for the village if a flood were to happen.
Oh,
That's
wow.
amazing, right? Whereas, like similarly, we had a project in Kenya where there were stories that were told, and the kids had to, again, it was a bit of, it's like a history project, so it was a historical story, and they had to retell the story from the perspective of the antagonist, from a historical perspective, and if the historical event did not happen, and causality. The girls just, I mean, the kinds of posters they designed, what they did, one of them got published also because it was just
Wow.
amazing. But they'd never been
Mhm.
asked this, they've never been told this. I feel like for us, we saw that as a big, big shift, but not to underestimate our boys. Our boys also were, I was amazed how open they were to learning. I mean, I gave you the example about the poha in Maharashtra with the pop-up restaurant. But in
Yeah.
another such example, which I can't remember where it was from, it may have been from Morocco, but the kids had to run a population census project. And
Okay.
what the boy came back with, his main learning was that the women were more educated and worked longer and harder than the men in his community. Now, I was just amazed that the boy also was very open to change. So I don't want to underestimate our boys. I think they are also fantastic. But I do think our girls maybe need a little bit of an extra push and a voice to open
Yeah.
up their creativity.
Yeah. True. Um, so the next question here would be, how did you monitor and evaluate the program and its success?
Yeah, this was hard for us because obviously we were working in places where, because of COVID, there was limited access, there was limited technology, and all of it. We did do a pre and post test, but what we decided to do is not just do it on knowledge, but do it on conceptual learning, do it on discovery. And by discovery, we mean by what do the kids discover about this which links to their real life, and how does that play a role, and how does that interject. And
Right.
we also did an assessment on 21st century skills, especially
Okay.
creativity, communication, and critical thinking. And sometimes the tests were very simple. Like, for example, for critical thinking, it was to actually write down in steps or articulate in steps how to prepare some of the most regular dishes that you have. So, like a sandwich, for example. You get the bread, then you put the butter, then to explain this in steps, because that is critical thinking for a 6 or 7 year old, right? They have to think about each
Yeah.
step, what comes before why, and then ask them at the end of the project, can you do the same thing? At the end of the program. Now, we didn't teach them how to make the sandwich. That was not the point. The point was, through the course of this entire journey, did you learn how to think step by step by step? And did you
Right.
learn how to think about everything and put it together? So
Absolutely.
those were some of the assessments that we ran. In addition, we also looked at completion. We also looked at how easy it was to do all of this because it was designed for low resource. So, was it actually easy to do in low resource context? And we also looked at those who continued the program after we finished the pilots. And we had almost 70% of the organizations we work with continue after we finished, which for us was probably the most important piece of data because it just goes to show that they did it, they loved it, and then they continued it.
Right. True. Um, so, how can other people replicate or work on this?
Actually, very easily. And I should just maybe share with you the link to the website. And then people can just go on the website and then they can download whatever they would like from the website. And once downloaded, they can use it. There are no restrictions, there is no cost to this. So they can feel absolutely free to do it. We have, my own children do it at home. So
Yeah.
that's how you can replicate it. But more than that, I just want to say, I think what we've learned is, of course, if you need our resources, please do. But even if you want to use your own, it's doable, which is a little bit of common sense and a little bit of just, not giving up. Those I think would be the two big ingredients. We can make it happen. You can make it happen.
Yeah. What would you suggest are the main ways to move forward? And then, what are your biggest takeaways or learning?
I mean, I think the one really big way to move forward in my mind is to, like I said, stop making education so inaccessible. So the way we designed our schools and our education is it's only doable when you're in school with this teacher, with this book, and it's very inaccessible to somebody who is not part of that system. I mean, I as a parent would not be able to access or know what to do with my child if schools were to close tomorrow because I don't know the curriculum. I don't know what they're learning. I don't know what that means for me. So I think we just need to open up that definition a lot. And I think we need to stop underestimating everybody involved. We underestimate parents and we say, oh, they can't do anything. They may choose not to. And most of us are very busy, and a lot of them were really busy earning a daily living, but they can. They've survived and they're doing very well for themselves, which means even if they're illiterate, they can. We underestimate our children. We think that they can't learn, but they're learning every day, everywhere. They're surviving in these very harsh and difficult contexts. So,
Yeah.
why should we underestimate them? And then we underestimate our teachers and we say only if we give them a script will they be able to do it. I feel like let's stop underestimating people and let's start opening education for everyone to access, because really learning can happen anytime and anywhere. And if we make that happen, even the gap in the learning proficiencies will decrease. Because the minute you start saying that these kids are learning everywhere, then whether or not the wealthy kid is going to the tuition class will not matter. It will not matter whether or not the privileged children have access to more affluent resources, because now everyone is learning all the time. So I think we need to just do those two or three fundamental shifts, and we should be able to really have learned from this experience, um, hopefully successfully.
Wow. Wow, that is the word. I mean, it is brilliant the way you have put it all together and your ideas and how you're doing this great work. And it is actually education for all and the innovative ways you have come across. So, thank you so much for being with us on this talks. It has been very, very inspiring to see your presentation, to know your views, your ideas, and coming to know more and more about your journey. And we would end on this note that, like you've all put it together, I want to be, I want to know, I want to see, I want to know, I want to share all I can give, I want to be, I want to know. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. And I just shared a link to our website. I'll also drop it into the chat. If anybody would like to access it, please feel free. And thank you again for the opportunity to be here and talk to you and for the very insightful questions.
Yeah, pleasure has been absolutely ours. Thank you, ma'am, and congratulations, and keep doing the great work and keep inspiring people. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.